Face to face, hand to hand, film to film.
You're dumping shit on cooked rice here. Welcome to Film, the Memories of Murder podcast. One of my absolute favorite films. Iñaki, this is a film that we both seen multiple times. What did you think of it this time, and when was the first time you saw this film?
I think the first time I saw this film was in 2008, I want to say. So it's been now 13 years since I last saw it. Since I first saw it. I think I saw it again in 2011, probably. So it's been 10 years since I last saw the film. I still think this is one of the greatest Bong Joon-ho films, and probably one of my top 5 favorite films.
Wow. Okay. Well, you're not going to find much disagreement from me either. This used to be my sort of go-to South Korean film that I would show to people back when I could see friends and real people in real life. So it's been a few years since I've watched it too. But I've probably seen this film a dozen times or so. I'm guessing I showed it to you too for the first time in 2008. So I've been a Bong Joon-ho fan for a long time, and I think you've kind of joined along with me in the quest of seeing some of his films. Like we kind of got introduced to him, or at least I kind of got introduced to him early in 2005. I remember reading the New York Times review of this piece and checking it out from the library and being pretty blown away back then. And then I saw The Host a year later, and I was just all the way in as far as being a Bong fan. So you heard it here first. We were fans of his 15 years ago. At least I was. And then I introduced you to him. And I think we probably saw Mother together in 2009, which was coincidentally the first film-to-film podcast that we did together. So big fan of his work. I've loved a ton of his films. For me, this film still is right up there with Parasite and The Host as my favorite of his work. Definitely one of my favorite of the 21st century. And definitely one of my all-timers, too. So I have a lot of love for this film. I probably still put it at the top of my list for Bong. You were saying that it's towards the top of your list? Is it at the top of the list, or for your personal Bong ranking?
I would say it's at the top. Parasite is a very, very, very close second. They're extremely different films, but what makes... and we'll go more in detail later, but what makes this film so good for me is that it touches such a complicated and dramatic topic. I mean, actually a real life topic, and he does it like so masterfully. You can somehow talk about something, very like have so many social criticism while having humor, while being respectful for the real event in a certain way, while there's just so many things that Bong Joon-ho did in just one film.
Yeah, I totally agree. The film and Bong Joon-ho in general, but I feel like this film more than any other one is just super rich with just stuff to pick apart. There's just so many things going on, from the humor to the sort of the backdrop of we see a rapidly changing Korea that's still kind of under military authoritarian rule. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the parallels of that to your home country, Chile, which was also having some similar stuff. We'll get to that later. But I think you're right. This is a very different film from Parasite, the film that, of course, he's probably most well known for at this point, that won Best Picture, and I think he won Best Director too. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, he won. He won like all the Best Picture, Best Director, Best Foreign Language, or Best International Film. Maybe he won Best Writing. I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean,
he's a fantastic writer, and that's something where it's like neither of us are Korean speakers, but like you can tell just the way that he's able to juggle all these things, and I like the way you put it. He's just juggling all these things at once, and he's doing it so well that so many of the things just land home. That it's a film that conveys the necessary sense of gravity for sort of this authoritarian rule, but also having a good sense of humor and social commentary, and just being entertaining as hell. And in that sense, I think this and The Host probably are the two films that are the most similar to each other. They came next to each other as well. I'm also a big fan of The Host, but this film is definitely my top Bong film.
I think I will do a small correction here, though. South Korea was not under authoritarian rule at the time that it's set. I believe that they were at least either in transition, if not already in democratic rule.
They were in transition. I looked this up earlier today. I think their first elections was actually 1987, and this film starts in 1986. So technically, it's covered within the film. But I mean, you're right. The country is changing rapidly. I guess probably technically a good chunk of the film happens after those elections. I think we even see some of those elections happening. But we see
the president is doing like his visits and whatnot.
Right. So I guess I'm technically slightly wrong. Part of it occurs during authoritarian rule, and part of it after the first presidential election. So, but regardless, it's a very chaotic time in South Korea, which at that time was a very it's just not a very wealthy country at that point. And it's kind of interesting to think that this film starts in 86, and we sort of have this flash forward to when the film was made in 2003. And now we're about the same time frame forward, 17 or 18 years. And again, South Korea is a different place. And I think maybe one of the biggest, most interesting developments in this film in the last 2 years is they actually caught the killer.
Yeah, I read about that.
Yeah, and the irony of it is, like, a huge focus of this film is just on the limitations of the technology and stuff like that they're not able to do it. They have to send the DNA test to America to have that done. Clearly, they are just poorly trained individually, and they don't know what they're doing. At one point, there's a pretty funny dialogue about, like, the FBI in America and how they have to investigate that way. So a lot is focused on just like sort of the general incompetence of the systems as well as the individual detectives in there. And then the irony of it is technology comes along in 2019 and through DNA technology is able to solve the case.
So here's the thing, though. The man, I mean, they figured out that he was probably the killer. However, he has never been tried for those crimes, nor will he ever be tried for those crimes because of statute of limitations.
There we go. We're enlisting the Esquire at law early here.
No, that's relevant in the sense that the case was closed, I think, I want to say at least 15 years ago, if not more. The case was officially closed.
So I have it open right now. The statute of limitations for the most recent victims was going to expire on April 2nd, 2006. Yeah. That was increased to 25 years in 2007, and so it was lifted in 2015. So there you go.
Either way, it's past the statute of limitations. So it's interesting to note because technically, I mean, this is more of like going into like the ugly technicalities. One that has implications which are, under the law, the man is considered innocent for those crimes. Just like under the law, Bill Cosby is considered innocent for his crimes, or OJ is considered innocent for his crimes.
Well, as the forensic person said, there is some very strong evidence that we know who the killer is.
Yeah.
And not to mention he's confessed to.
No, for sure. Although the movie already if there's one thing you cannot believe, at least based on this film, is a confession.
Yes. Yes, although he confessed in 2020. So,
no, I know. And he was already on... the man was caught for other rapes and killings, so therefore he's I think already like on life
Yes.
with life sentence.
Yes, he was caught for the rape and murder of his sister-in-law, which is pretty fucked up. So we'll just bring that up, I guess. One interesting thing about this film too is a lot of it is also similar to Zodiac in that sense, like about the sort of psychological toll and stuff like that it takes on both the general public, but specifically a few of the detectives in it. One other interesting thing from real life too is that they actually thought there was a copycat murder that turned out to be the real murder. So they prosecuted and convicted that person, and that person actually served time. And then they found out when later the actual killer, Lee Chun-jae, confessed that person was actually innocent. So it sort of shows you the amount of like fear and stuff and incompetence and corruption going on to make that happen. In addition, and this is all from Wikipedia, so I don't know. I assume this is true, but they say that at least 4 individuals deemed as possible suspects took their own lives in the 1990s after being investigated and abused by the police. So it kind of helps to show sort of that atmosphere of dread and paranoia and fear that gripped this society during that time.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, jumping a little bit into the film, what is fascinating about this film is the police are portrayed in an extremely sympathetic way. I mean, to a point where, especially like the town cops, you know. But when you think about it just a little bit, they're horrible people. Like, you know, they're tortured. Like they're grabbing whatever guy they think that might be guilty. They are torturing, you know, confessions out of them, to lock them up, and I mean that's a level of injustice that you see, you know. That's not justice, and those were not real cops in a way, right? Like that's not what we expect for cops to do. Cops catch the bad guys. They don't create bad guys, and that's one thing that makes this film fascinating, because I mean you really like the main characters, but they're not good people. They're really bad people, and the film never actually calls them bad people, and you don't feel like they're bad people. But on the scheme of things, on their actions, not their intentions, but their actions, these are individuals who are part of the problem.
Yeah, they're doing terrible things. I mean, one of the detectives, Detective Cho, who is the person that has the special covering over the shoe, literally the only thing of value they seem to bring to the investigation is to beat up and kick the shit out of potential suspects. So, I mean, it's something that is somehow taken. It somehow has the necessary gravity to it, at least to me. But yeah, you're right. He totally humanizes the detectives, and it's something where it's like I don't know how many people can pull that off. And part of that is certainly the performances, specifically Song Kang-ho, who is the lead Detective Park in this film. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible if you think about it, like how depraved some of the actions that they do and how despicable it is. But they still come off to be extremely sympathetic. Even the detective Cho, who throughout the film we see him just basically abusing suspects the whole time. At the end, there's this like really sad scene that somehow manages to be sad, but also kind of like poetically just, where he ends up getting his leg amputated from untreated tetanus because
one of his former victims, like
yeah, and I mean like that's like in another film the guy is just portrayed as like a total monster, but in this film somehow like we feel kind of bad for him, and yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so it. I mean, filmmaking wise, it's a fascinating film. I mean,
Yeah. So one last thing I wanted to share on the real life case before we move too far into the film was he actually did see Memories of Murder at the time. It was the most seen film in Korea in 2003, the time it was released. He said, "I just watched it as a movie. I had no feeling or emotion towards the movie." So it's a pretty strong non-reaction there by the eventual quote-unquote killer.
What did Bong Joon-ho say?
Bong Joon-ho, I think, was actually touring at the time, and he basically said that he needed more time. He needed time to process it, which is totally understandable. Yeah. So a couple more things about just sort of like the historical context of this film. It has a reputation as being one of the absolute best South Korean films. It actually lost Best Picture that year in South Korea to a film called Spring, Summer, Fall, Winter, and Spring. A film I'm not actually a big fan of. It definitely has its supporters, but I'm not a huge fan of that. But it came out the same year as Old Boy, so that's a particularly strong year for Korean cinema. Old Boy, of course, being another of those. Korean Screen Cinema did a top 100 list of Korean films. This came in third, Old Boy came in fourth, and Spring, Summer, Fall, Winter, and Spring came in sixth. So really, really strong year, 2003, for Korean films.
Well, what came in first?
First, they put Burning, another film I'm not the biggest fan of. Second was Parasite.
Oh, I have not seen Burning yet.
Yeah, Burning's an interesting film. It's more art house. I need to rewatch it at some point. I am a fan of the director, but I don't know if it totally hit home for me, at least. But yeah, South Korea, definitely one of my favorite countries to seek out films from of the last 20 years, and I'd say this film was definitely one of the early ones that sort of gave me a strong introduction into their work.
Yeah, they have a fascinating dark humor, many of them.
Yeah. And, one thing, if we're just sort of talking about the overall context of South Korean films, is just sort of the overall tone and tenor that they choose to take. And one thing that doesn't always sort of connect with the way I watch films and the way I like them is they can often be a little melodramatic, shall I say. And
True.
The ones that I tend to not be a fan of are the ones that take that, a step or two too far. And one thing that I appreciate about director Bong is that for his films, they tend to not do that in the same way. Not that they are emotionally inert or anything like that. They certainly can trigger those things. But for me, it's done in a way that isn't overly done, in a way that maybe a few other films. Taekuki, A Brotherhood of War is probably the worst offender for me that I could mention. How do you feel about that?
I agree. I'm very bad with the titles of Korean films, so I cannot remember all the movies that I've seen, but many of them would certainly overdo the dramatic scenes and abuse their soundtrack to pull strings. So in a way, very manipulative. And Bong Joon-ho films tend not to do that. Nearly as much, at least, than the majority of Korean films that I've seen.
Yeah, they tend to be emotional, but not overly so. I'd say they have a strong balance, and some people will connect to that more than others. I think I tend to be a little bit colder and clinical compared to other people. But for me, that's definitely a big reason why Bong's films. He's definitely my favorite South Korean director.
Yeah, I'm a softie. I do fall for the dramatics and the emotional. But I do not like when films abuse, not so much in the plot, but abuse on the scenery, the use of music, etc., to make it extra melodramatic when it's not necessary, and that's South Korean films definitely sin of that. Hong Kong films do even more, but South Korean films certainly abuse their soundtrack, in my opinion. Yeah. And so when you encounter the ones that do not, like Bong Joon-ho's films, it's so much more palatable.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, one American director that I think overdoes it for me at least. Sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes he does it right. Is Spielberg, in many ways, it's interesting because Tarantino has actually compared Bong Joon-ho to Spielberg, just someone that makes really entertaining genre films that also combine a lot of things at once and are just emotional as well. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. He probably wouldn't have been my first comparison to director Bong, but it's interesting that Tarantino, who has been a big supporter of Bong Joon-ho over the years, has talked about him in that way.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting comparison, and to be honest, I actually think it's a pretty just comparison, in the sense that Bong Joon-ho's films, all of them are dramas on which it's the catch-all phrase for genre, basically, in the sense that many of them have comedy, have some entertainment elements. Their use of music are pretty spot on the scene, basically the shot composition, everything is pretty fucking perfect. I mean, generally speaking, like, you can see that. And I mean, Spielberg, and maybe until, if you will, I don't know, like
AI.
It's a weird film. AI, he was working off a script by Kubrick, and apparently Kubrick's script is actually even more unbearable than Spielberg's film. And to be honest, I actually am probably one of the few people who did like AI.
I like AI too, actually. But
oh, that's hilarious. But I mean, but anyways, no, I was thinking like Ready Player One, things like that. Like his latest film, which is like mostly CGI. Like it feels like almost like Spielberg put his name on it to get paid, and that's it. But I mean, ignoring his latest film, like his earlier film, or even the 90s, even more recently, they're all extremely well competent. Many of them are entertaining, and he knows how to use the score. And Spielberg, in my opinion, he doesn't actually abuse the score the way that other films do it. Part has to do with
when he's at his best, he does not. But sometimes he can go a bit far for me. But
really? Like I don't know. Like, I'm thinking Saving Private Ryan has like very dramatic scenes, but they're just enough.
Okay. See, that's a good example, I think, of our differences. For me, Saving Private Ryan does not work for me, and it pushes it a little bit too far on the sentimentality. That's probably like a good sort of like line in the sand of where maybe we slightly differ on these films.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for me, it's like, it's just enough. It's almost past it, but it stays within the line.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm glad I brought that up because I think he is an interesting comparison to Bong in some sense. I mean, in the sense that they're both making like entertaining films that are appealing to a mass audience, but also are like technically very immaculate. And I think most film people would appreciate films from both directors.
Yeah, I mean, think of Okja.
Yeah.
Or Snowpiercer. I mean, those are two films that actually, I would say, Bong Joon-ho steps to the line of Saving Private Ryan, and actually in Okja, I think he steps further than.
Well, I like Okja. It's probably at the very bottom of my list for Bong's films, but yeah, I mean. Yeah, I guess it's just sort of differences in temperament to some extent. For me, Bong never crosses that line. Spielberg sometimes does. I mean, I still like Spielberg in general, but I bring him up as an example of a good director, in my opinion, that sometimes gets a little too sentimental for my taste.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, well, I also wanted to sort of bring up one interesting thing I thought with the tone, and I wanted to talk a bit about sort of like the torture aspects to it, is it's shown in a very interesting way. We talked a little bit about how he doesn't demonize the characters that way. They don't go into a moody room, and like the character with kicks like lets off some like nasty sneer or something, where his face is half lit and starts beating people up. It's shown in a way that's really, really kind of blunt and frank in a way. Like, one example I wanted to give is where they're watching that like Inspector Cop TV, and they're literally watching it with the suspect, and they're like singing the theme song and stuff like that. And then I forget what happens, but it's like, oh, it's time to go back to work, which is literally means like the guy torturing. Yeah. And like, it's shown in a way that doesn't necessarily shy away. It's definitely not how they'd show it in a Hollywood film, but it's very honest and frank about it. But it's also kind of funny in a really dark way. I don't know. How did you feel about that stuff?
It's funny because like, I think when I first watched it, and the 2 times I've watched it with you, and we have an extremely dark sense of humor. You know, we both laughed. I mean, we laughed about, you know, that scene. We laughed about the fact that he has like a boot cover, right, to beat up people. We laughed about all that stuff. Last night was I think the first time I've seen it by myself, and I watched it the night before, you know, recording, very professional. Anyways, it was the first time watching it by myself, and I kind of thought twice about it. It's comedic, but probably highly realistic. It's not uncommon for. I mean, if you read torture reports from, I don't know, like, I mean, if I could even Chile, like, it was not uncommon for the torturers to fraternize with their torturee during the off hours. And I mean, here you know, you have this example, right? I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but I mean, there's a Chilean comedian who, like, he's kind of old now, but I mean, he was in the torture camps during the Pinochet dictatorship, like, because he's a communist. But the dude was always a comedian, or actually he wasn't a comedian before that, but like, he became a comedian in the torture camps or concentration camps, because the guy like realized that he would gain favors by just telling jokes. and you know, like, and there was an interview where he would literally say like, yeah, no, like, I mean, I would kind of like, I was telling jokes to get everyone's spirits up, but I mean, the secret police, they kind of liked it too, so they will all round up and like, we were all left together, and then, you know, next hour they would be shocking me on, you know, they would be shocking my body with electricity. It's like, damn. You know. And so going back, like, I mean, yeah, I can see that, like, a small police precinct where they're used to, you know, torturing people, and it's like during their off hours they're watching, you know, whatever like show is on TV.
I mean, they probably got like 3 channels. I mean, you're gonna watch what you're gonna watch. They probably all watch the same stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I really like how it's portrayed. How stuff like the cruelty and the incompetence is shown to just be very almost banal and plain. To me, it almost feels more honest in a way, and it's so. It rather than being wrapped up in something incredibly more sinister, I think it's really interesting to show incompetence as just sort of like something that, you know, people just sort of do to each other and just be really crude. Again, they come back to it later where like they go back to like his parents' place and are eating at the barbecue place that his dad runs, even though they like literally just had this big standoff with them, and it totally gives off this like great sort of small town dynamic where it's like, yeah, we've done some fucked up shit to each other, but we still live in the same city, and maybe there's only 1 or 2 barbecue places, so yeah, we're gonna eat here, and yeah, everyone's okay with that.
It is amazing. I mean, and this is to the writing of this film, right? How the town itself is a character in that sense.
Yeah. But the really under dramatization of the torture and stuff like that, it reminds me a lot of some Japanese filmmakers like Kitano Takeshi and Kurosawa Kiyoshi, and how they just sometimes will. And I've shown you some of their films in the past. You probably have to jog your memory.
No,
but
you
they
don't
just,
need to.
yeah, but it's shown in just a way that's very different from sort of like Hollywood or Western conventions, where we kind of go in for close-ups and shown in just this way that's very blunt and plain. And I'm all in for that because I think it's an interesting way to show it.
Well, with Takashi films, that's part of the fun of those films, right? The Takashi films is, the dentist. I don't know. I always think of I forget the name of the movie, but like him like shoving like a dentist drill down someone's mouth, but it's like very like crude,
Outrage.
real. Yeah, outrage. That was it. And I mean, like, yeah, I would agree with that. And what's interesting though is that in those films, that's kind of part of the fun, right? Those are gangster films, mainly. I would say with the other director, Kitano.
That was Kitano. That's Takeshi Kitano. The other one's Kiyoshi Kurosawa, who did Cure and Pulse.
Gotcha. And Pulse?
That's the one where the internet kills people.
Right, and Cure, okay.
Yeah, Cure is the hypnotist.
Yes.
Actually, one interesting thing, I'll let you gather your thoughts, is in Sight and Sound does a poll every 10 years where they survey a bunch of directors and they ask them to put sort of like 10 films on that are their favorites. And one interesting thing with Bong, obviously this is almost a decade after he did Memories of Murder, is he named 3 serial killer films, which means he's a pretty big fan of the genre, as am I.
Right.
One of them was Vengeance is Mine, which shows stuff from a serial killer's point of view and is very sort of anthropological. One of them was Cure, so that's Kiyoshi Kurosawa. So I'm guessing that's where some of the influence comes in. The third one was Zodiac, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because the comparisons with that film, there's a lot, we'll put it that way.
What's interesting is I actually have not seen Zodiac, so I don't know how much I can help out here.
Okay, well maybe that will be a very short monologue for me then, in that case. Great film, you should see it.
I know, and I know the comparisons. I remember you telling me the comparisons back in 2008. I mean, you're saying like, yeah, Zodiac is just slower, and I'm like, fuck it, I don't want to watch that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, those films are both in my top of that decade, but Memories of Murder definitely is a special place above Zodiac for me.
What I was going to mention about Cure is Cure. From what I remember, that it's been years since I last saw that film, the violence was actually almost like far away. You never had a close up. It was usually like twice removed. You would see you would usually see a door frame, and then within that frame you would see the person doing whatever killing they were doing. This one has a little bit more of a closer violence, right? You can see from up close the person committing the violence. However, there's very little focus on the person receiving it. So the person receiving it is usually somewhat off camera, on the corner of the camera, and I think when it comes to framing, a big part of that has to do with the film telling you this story is not about them. It's not about the person being tortured. This story is about the cops.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. Kurosawa Kiyoshi definitely has a different feel to his films, but they both sort of like keep the camera back in a way that sort of distances itself emotionally from the action taking place. I think Bong is probably a little more conventional in some ways than Kurosawa, but they both are interesting in that they deviate, I think, from sort of the genre conventions of showing a kill.
Yeah,
or
that makes sense.
Showing human suffering or human damage. I mean, in Bong's films especially, the people suffering are often inert because they are also tied up. So they are not exactly moving a lot.
or they're mentally disabled or something else, which is, again, if you actually think about it, these people are monsters, but
Yeah. Okay, well, I wanted to also give you some time to talk about Chile too. So let me set sort of the
wait.
tone.
But you know
Okay.
what's interesting? Have you done the summary yet?
Oh shit. No, I didn't. One second. Memories of Murder.
So half
Okay.
hour into
Yeah.
into this.
Okay. In 1986, Pak and Cho are two simple-minded detectives assigned to a double murder investigation in the South Korean province. But when the murderer strikes several more times with the same pattern, the detectives realize that they are chasing the country's first documented serial killer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Simple. The premise of this could be any serial killer movie, really. It's the form of it that really sets it apart.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the killing of the serial killer. I mean, somewhat stylized. It's really not that big of a focus. You barely see the bodies. I mean, you see them, but it's what you don't see that it's almost scarier.
Yeah. One last thing I wanted to add to the torture report before we talk about the backdrop and Chile was that the cruelty, I thought, was also interesting in the sense that it's not done sort of like in a dirty, hairy, extremely competent, this is what we need to do in order to get the criminals, we need to just push stuff to the boundary. It's just done in a far more incompetent sort of way. Okay.
Yeah, it's very improvisational.
Exactly, and I think that's probably what Song Kang-ho brings a lot to this film too. Supposedly he improvised the first drum kick that he did, so and he sort of gives that like great feel. We'll talk about him later because he's fantastic in this film. He's good in Parasite. He is super good in this film. So let's talk about the backdrop. So we talked a little bit about the Korean elections coming. And, you know, Korea is a country that now is pretty technological, pretty developed. At this time, Korea is not like Japan. It took a lot longer for that to happen, and it happened in a really rapid time. So from 1986 to now, there has been a ton of changes in the country. During this time, there was a lot of protests, a lot of student protests specifically. Bong at this time would have been, I think, 16. He was 34 when he released this film, which is right around our age, which is a little disturbing to think about. He...
Wait, how old is he?
He is now, by my math skills, 51.
Oh shit, he looks super young.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, 51 for a director is not too old yet. At least.
That's true. That's true.
Hopefully, he has a lot of films left in him, because I am a fan of just about everything he does. So yeah, Changing Nation. Of course, there are also sort of military defense drills. They are literally worried about a North Korean invasion. So there's sort of like blackout, air raid sirens, stuff like that, where they cut the electricity. We see times when the detectives are sort of investigating with flashlight because electricity has been cut. And I think it makes a really, really good and interesting backdrop just to see the country changing during this time. Wanted to see any thoughts you had on that. You have told me in the past that Chile, the country you're from, is often compared, at least internally, to
some folks
to South Korea. At that time, you also had sort of a military dictatorship in the 80s with Pinochet.
Yeah.
You have the floor.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, like some folks, I wouldn't say it's like a massive thing. I've just seen it on like some like debates or news. Sometimes when they're talking about economics, not so much about like history per se, but and I've also seen that comparison when I was in undergrad when taking political economy of Latin America, but. The reason why that comparison happens is that South Korea, Chile, but I mean, South Korea and Chile, at least in the mid 80s, were both countries relatively poor, and somehow and they both had U.S. backed dictatorships. um, and they both kind of gain or transition to democracy around the 90s, like late 80s or early 90s in Chile. And somehow South Korea became an extremely technological developed nation, while Chile today is still a high income developing nation. Probably one of the richest countries in Latin America, but still like nowhere near South Korea's level. But to me personally, I do find fascinating more on the just the little echoes of the simplicity, if you will, the mental simplicity in the characters, like in the 80s. Like I wouldn't be surprised like Chilean cops, Chilean detectives would have been the same way, right, when dealing with the crime not committed by the government. Because like they were used to the government killing dissidents. They're not used to serial killers doing that, and whether having the technology or the know-how or the actual like procedures to capture a true a criminal that is not the government would have been probably really difficult.
Yeah, that's why you need the Italian giallo detectives to come in.
I mean, haven't we talked about how they're also awful?
Yeah, they're pretty terrible.
Like, I just remember the giallo where the only cops that actually did something were the cops of Spain.
Yeah, or the great giallo investigative technique where they're like, we'll just take away your passport and make you investigate it for us. Random artist.
Yeah. But I mean, I do think that Memories of Murder is sort of a fascinating film in the sense that it puts you in the place of cops who are formed, because I don't know if actually watching this movie back again, another little details, and the details are important. And I mean, are how there's a scene where it's raining, the radio is playing this particular song, which was a sign that the killer was going to kill again. And they wanted to, and the police station basically calls, I don't know, probably the province's leadership to send more police backup to make sure that that women do not get killed and raped that night. But the leadership cannot send that backup because all the cops are quelling some protests somewhere else. And that actually echoes even today in Chile, where I don't know if South Korea still has the issue, but today in Chile, cops are extremely efficient. Well, not actually that efficient, but they whenever there is like a massive protest or something like that, you will have thousands of cops arresting people all the time. However, solving a simple crime is almost impossible. And it's like you can see a whole country's apparatus basically created to repress, not really to solve real crimes. And that's sort of an interesting comparison, an interesting similarity. I don't know if South Korea is like that today.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know either, specifically to that point. But I think one interesting thing that becomes a lot more clear as you just sort of see Bong's career as a whole, and you see sort of going from this to The Host, as well as all his other films. I mean, Snowpiercer is another obvious one. Is sort of like the way he portrays authority and like higher governmental institutions, which is generally he shows very negatively. Mm-hmm. And one interesting thing that about sort of like showing the sort of more humane side of the detectives is I think he's partially more putting blame higher up towards the systems at fault in certain ways. like in the Host, it's the government that pours chemicals, or the U.S. government specifically, that pours chemicals down the drain. Here, I thought you highlighted that scene perfectly, where they just don't refuse to send the resources, even though sort of rain's coming down. They have all these signs that the killer is going to strike again. But the government has other priorities, and they've already assigned troops elsewhere to what their real priorities are, sort of suppressing the student protests. And it sort of shows you how the system is not prioritized to handle this, down to, I mean, how they have to send the DNA test all the way to America in order to get the results. Or how the cops, in some ways, you could say it's his fault that, like, his car broke down, but really it's more like the system and the resources that are not providing him what's necessary to get it.
Yeah, like people who are doing the real police work do not have the resources. All of it goes to somewhere else. And this is another subtle element of it, even the torture element. We got I think the character's name is Cho.
Cho, the kicker?
Yeah, Cho the kicker. So Cho, he's pretty brutal, but he's like, he's a young cop. He clearly was trained that way. And you can tell in the sense that once the media is basically talking over and over again about the police torture, and they actually have a guy who they really think could be the killer, the chief tells Cho, do not hurt him, do not hit him. But Cho is he's just so trained on it that he hit him. And then the very next scene, which is a comedic scene, but also it's a scene where it's very telling of the failure of the structure. The chief or sergeant is telling him, didn't I tell you not to hit him? Didn't I tell you? And then he literally kicks Cho down the stairs, like down fucking stairs. Like he hit him, like first he punches him, he slaps him, and then kicks him down the stairs.
Which looks like it hurts.
Completely. And then he kind of walks away. And again, it's portrayed in a comedic manner, but it also, it tells you a very deep story about how this is all the way down the chain. It's a culture of abuse and torture.
Yeah, I mean, they're not portrayed as bad people, but what you get the feeling of is that is specifically how they've been trained. Yeah. And as the society has changed, they have not trained Detective Cho how to evolve and move along with society.
None of them have been trained except for
Soul.
So.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that's really interesting, too. And sort of at the end of the film, too, when we flash forward, finally, we see how Detective Park has been able to evolve with society, which is apparently to sell juicers, which is kind of an amusing profession to end up in. But
he just fucking quits. And then and then Detective So devolves into the inefficient, aggressive individuals that the other cops are.
Right. The way that it shows sort of like the crisscross, where in the end, Park ends up being the sensible one that ultimately does the right thing and prevents probably just a straight stone cold murder. And Detective So, who is so fed up with the system at that point that he's ready to just toss everything he once stood for out. I think it's super well done. I mean, the ways that the characters move and change and try to struggle to keep up with like the changing society, as well as like just sort of the murders that are being happening and the toll it's taking, the way it develops characters, it's just immaculate.
I mean, yeah, the layers in this film. There's just so many fucking layers in just a couple of scenes and shots.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's see. There's a lot to talk about here, so I want to just make sure we hit the big stuff. There's a lot of great scenes in this film, so let me run some by you. you pick out if something hits. I'm reminded of there's like a quote from a very good director, Howard Hawks, that like a great movie is 3 really good scenes and no bad scenes. And this film has so many good scenes that it has way more than 3 great ones. So, all right. The opening and the closing. So where we see the introduction to sort of that role setting, the kid copying him, and then we sort of close with him at the end. This one might be a good one. The second murder scene, where the camera is sort of like tracking him along, and we see sort of like the police procedural where people are just falling down that hill repeatedly, and the forensic team is doing it. You want to do that one?
I mean, let's do what. You lead this. I think all of them have so much to be talked about. I mean,
okay.
So
yeah, I mean, one thing about this film, about the look of it, is how it does a lot of stuff without cutting a lot. I think it cuts probably a lot less than American films. This scene is a good example because you're basically like circling and just touring the whole scene, and we sort of start with Detective Park identifying a shot of like a sneaker. And then we sort of follow him around while they're trying to control the press and waiting for the forensic team to survive. Meanwhile, everyone, yes, which is very late. Meanwhile, everyone is just sort of falling down the hill, including his boss, who might have been the chief. It's a different chief to start out with, and it's funny. And he's just trying to make sure the scene doesn't get too tainted. We see in the first scene also, we'd have already seen in the first scene, which was even worse, where we see them like waving around crime scene stuff. And then eventually a tractor is going and he's like, go, don't run over, don't run it over. But he doesn't catch it in time. So the tractor literally just runs over the footprint that he wanted to save. And then finally, the forensic team arrives just to fall down the hill. And it just sort of just encompasses just general incompetence, but also like, it's really funny. Like it's legitimately really, really funny. And just how he juggles like 2 or 3 things and 2 or 3 different emotions at the same time. It's just really, really good.
I mean, the level of chaos in that small scene. I mean, I can only imagine. I would love if, like those YouTube videos where they have forensic react or whatever, like Real Cop reacts. I would love to have them like see that scene and just talk about it, because I mean the failures are like from top to bottom and bottom to top is just complete and utter failure, incompetence and chaos. Like,
yeah, not to mention Park is probably the most competent person at that scene.
I know.
He's like at least trying to do the right things, but he is not set up for success in that scene.
I mean, and it's interesting how like none of the cops are like trying to create a real perimeter or block a fucking tractor from running over the only clue they had.
Yeah, and I really like how for each crime scene they just sort of build on it and they get a little bit better at handling it each time. Like I think in a later one, I don't know if it's the next one or the one after that, we see Detective Soul with like the megaphone that's like, stop, no one do anything, everyone shut the fuck up, we're gonna do this the right way.
No, that was a chase scene.
No, this is a crime scene I'm talking about. Like after there's a he does it twice, I think, with the megaphone. I know what you're taling about in the court.
Oh, that's court. Yeah. Isn't that when they do the sweep at the field to search for the third body?
I want to say it's a crime scene, but I think we're talking about the same moment.
That's still a crime scene technically.
Okay, sure. I want to say it was after they discovered a body, but I could be mistaken.
Because I'm thinking like the very last crime scene shown in the film, which is with the little girl or the high schooler. I don't know if she's a high schooler or middle schooler. That one looks really chaotic as well. I mean, you see the parents just crying. You see cops vomiting.
That's the one with rain. Like it's raining when they actually get to the crime scene.
Yeah. And you just see the press taking thousands of pictures of this little girl, like dead girl, and it's just very it's played in a more dramatic sense, as opposed to the first crime scene, which is just straight up comedic. The last crime scene is very dramatic, but I think it's very chaotic as well. It's just the framing of the film makes it seem more correct. But I mean, it's sufficiently chaotic that Detective So goes, touches the body, right, to cover her up, walks away, and the cops who are looking at it is like, who the fuck is that guy? You know. So there's still hints of not having the system down.
Sure. But they do. I mean, it's hard to argue that it's only uphill from running over a footprint with the tractor.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anything else on that second murder scene? The tractor, the tracking shot, all that stuff.
No. I think we talked enough.
This one's a short one. We'll quickly talk about it. I like how they introduce the sole detective, where it sort of starts with like this dread, where it's like there's a woman that thinks she's being followed, and so she's sort of worried, and then like they end up falling down the hill, so it's kind of funny. And then like Detective Park sees the guy talking to her. He's like, "What is this, a rapist paradise?" And just like jump kicks down and kicks the guy, who turns out to be Detective Soul, and that's how we get introduced to it. And it shows the dread, you get the comedy, and then you introduce the new character, so it's serving a narrative function as well.
But it's very well done. I mean this is where you get a feel of the paranoia in the town, which is very present. All women in the town are scared, and it adds to it that there's that weird scarecrow, like saying "turn yourself in" or something like that, as a woman.
Yeah, with the red,
yeah, and so you got the paranoia.
They picked up on the red earlier than the cops did too.
I know. You got the you got the stranger. So I mean, there is a clear question. But then, of course, once the guy starts talking to her, he kind of seems like an idiot. Which is one thing about about Ho's films is that Bong's films is that everyone is kind of an idiot.
Yeah.
At moments, like everyone has a brilliant moment, but everyone also kind of is an idiot at some moments.
I mean, it sure stands out in American films, especially action genre films. We're used to having like the best of the best, like the competent, or maybe they have like one flaw or something like that. Bong's characters are like highly flawed, and I love it.
Yeah, and I mean even Soul, who is like the best of the best in there,
is he?
Still comes off kind of like a goof.
Best of the bumpkins.
Exactly, and yeah. So no, it's a great moment because it starts with a little bit of horror, like it's almost like a horror film, and then it ends with, this random like jump kick. Or drop kick almost.
Yeah. This is a tangent slightly, but I wanted to bring this up sometime in the podcast, so I'll bring it up now. I have a different theory on So now. How, originally, I think you read it as sort of like he's being brought in to help solve the case. And I think that's certainly one motive. But I think another motive might be he's a pain in the ass. And he's kind of a dick. And he's like not a great team player. Is one thing you realize about him in the film. Like he collects a lot of information, and he does not try to communicate it very well with Park. So I think he's a good detective, but a bad communicator.
Well, he's a snob. He's a complete snob.
Yeah, and I think Soul may have just wanted to get rid of him. So they're like, all right, you can go on the shit detail over here.
Mm-hmm.
That's my new working theory with him.
No, I think I agree. I mean, So never tells Park that his theory of hairless people is wrong, and that's in part so Park is not doesn't get on his way.
Yeah, I mean, also it's like Soul realizes that like the first reenactment, which we'll talk about in just a moment, is a sham because the guy doesn't have the right hands for it. And they're like, what should we do? He's like, oh, continue on. And so he just sort of lets stuff build. There's and like, or even when like the new chief is talking and they're like, what are some stuff about the women? And like Detective Park and Cho have pretty useless suggestions. Oh, they're all beautiful and young, whatever. And then he has real information that he had not shared up to that point. So not a good team player, Detective Souls, and certainly not to start.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Also, it is surprising that being the first like serial killer in South Korea, though, that they would only send one detective from Seoul.
Yeah, I mean, it begs the question: how much do they really want to solve this? When it might be just impacting this very small rural community. It's like clearly not a priority.
Yeah, how much do they care?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So next scene, the reenactment, which I also thought was really funny. How they sort of have the chaos and slow-mo. There's like the guy in the dress that's supposed to be the victim that just starts beating up in the suspect while everyone are screaming about torture. I just found that scene to be really, really funny too.
Yeah, no, that is it. Especially the dad when he comes in.
Yeah.
And he's just like, son, you're innocent, and son's like... I know.
Yeah, there's like a moment in The Host where they're at a funeral for people, and like very sad, and then all of a sudden they start falling on the ground, and you're like, what the fuck? Am I supposed to laugh? Is this funny? And I feel like this scene kind of plays the same way. Having seen this film so many times, I know it's supposed to be funny. So I get the cues and stuff. But I think the original time I tossed this, you're like, what the fuck? Like, is this unintentionally funny? And then you realize, nope, it is intentionally very funny, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, that's... I mean, this is another of those scenes. I mean, I guess if you've never seen this director, like, yeah, that's another of those moments where you are realizing, oh, there's like some sense of humor here that is just really dark, but hilarious.
And clearly both of us connect pretty strongly with that sort of like darkly humorous nature. Okay, next scene. I'm just gonna pound these out. This one I like too. The karaoke. We start with the bad singing of Detective Park, which is always great. Song Song Kang-ho, funny guy. I could watch him riff and do comedy all the time. Meanwhile, we have Seoul, who's like just kind of eating fruit. He's like past a banana. He's like peeling some fruit in the side. We have the chief who's passed out, and then we have the torturing detective, Detective Cho, sort of like making out with a woman in the back, and then they sort of start having this serious discussion, a very drunk discussion, where Detective Park ends up saying that Korea is the size of his dick. In America, they have to investigate with their brains. It's very, very funny. I wish I could quote it more exactly. And then the chief wakes up and starts to throw up. It's all done in like one shot where you're seeing everything going on. I like it. I'm a big fan of that. The way that scene is staged, how you're showing all this different stuff going on, and how at the end the chief throws up and like basically chastises them and is like, you two better fucking get along.
No, for sure. And I mean, and when it comes to character construction, I think it does a really good job too. Because I mean, just play by play, the scene is very funny. The monologue that Park goes into is hilarious, right? Talking about how it's like, you're a detective from Seoul. What, do you think you're from America? You think you're FBI? America's huge. That's why, so they cannot go around and do all that. That's why they use their brains. That's the nerdy stuff. South Korea, it's small, the size of it's the size of my dick or something like that. And it's like, so here we can use legs, and that's what we do. Real detectives in Korea use legs. In America, they use brains, but that's because they cannot use their legs. But So yeah, I know it's a hilarious quote. I know I'm paraphrasing. It's probably
Yeah. I
but
wish
but
I
but
had it
that
pulled up.
but that's a little bit of the message. But what I like about that also is that it really shows the disdain that Detective Park has with Detective So, in that like he's so accustomed to being an action person, like he's accustomed to being a cop, like a street cop, if you will, on this whole looking at records, taking records, just doing the paperwork that is required to really do real investigation, a proper investigation, is it's new to him and it's almost threatening, right? Like he sees his position as the smartest detective in the town, completely threatened by this person coming from Seoul. And at the same time, he's telling him, dude, you're not that good. You're not FBI. You're just a shitty cop from Seoul. You're as shitty as I am. So act like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I think as far as Detective Park's character too, his insecurity really comes across when Detective Soul comes in, and it doesn't help by Detective So's sort of lack of communication, but yeah, I mean, it's an eventual point where it like pulls back and it's like Detective So is like the very competent one, and then we pull back again, and there's a moment that kind of helps to really create the small town vibe where Park asks So, is like, does this stuff happen in Seoul very often? And Detective So is like, never. And it just sort of correctly frames this as how this is like, I don't know, it's bigger than both of them in some ways. It's like small town cop, big city cop. It's working together. It's still bigger than both of them, and it sort of consumes both of them in the course of the film.
Yeah, no, and also, I mean, well, and that's kind of the evolution of the characters too, right? I mean, like at that point, Detective Park does believe Detective So, and on the other hand, Detective So is little by little sort of regressing in his ways. But that's an interesting connection you bring up, in that it also tells you that in a way Detective Park is correct. Detective So comes in thinking he's hot shit, thinking he is FBI, because probably he's training at the big city. It might be even taught by an FBI agent. Who knows?
Right. And there's no doubt he's thoroughly unimpressed with everything he sees at this the police department. Correctly so.
Right. But at the end of the day, it is a movie set in South Korea in the 80s, and South Korea is a small, shitty country.
Yeah. Including Seoul.
Including Seoul. I mean, that's it when it tells you not only is this the first time that this kind of shit is happening there, but also is the first time that like something so complicated is happening that they cannot resolve, and they have to literally go to the U.S., require U.S. help in order to solve these actual crimes. With a quick tangent there, one thing I read is that in real life, and I'm intrigued that Bong Joon-ho did not include this, because in real life, the forensic test for the semen was sent to Japan.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
and I think that would have added another wrinkle to the story, in the sense that South Korea and Japan are not friends. They're not enemies, but they're not. But there's a history between those two nations.
There's some historical animosity, no doubt about it.
But that would also create that would add to that concept of like South Korea is this small shitty country, in the sense like you literally have to rely on this other Asian country that you disdain.
Yeah, frenemies.
Yeah.
They could have done it that way, or they could do it the way of America. And America is referenced, like with the FBI and stuff like that. So I'm okay with the way they did it. I don't know if there's a wrong decision there. I would be fine with Japan too.
exactly. No, I don't think it's wrong. I mean, it goes well with the, especially with the rant, and also it just connects so beautifully. I mean, and this is more on the on the macro level, like, it really connects beautifully that, you got that monologue, the drunken monologue, and then at the end they do have to rely on the FBI for.
Yeah, and to no surprise to Americans, the FBI was pretty useless.
I mean, the FBI did what they asked them to do.
Yeah,
Check.
but it did not help them solve the crime.
No, because they didn't have the right guy.
Yeah, it's
It didn't-
inconclusive.
In fact, it did help them do what their job is, which is not to catch innocent people.
Yeah.
So it did help them do the job. I mean, it would
Well,
have been a
wasn't
double
it-
injustice.
Wasn't it inconclusive?
No, it said that, it was inconclusive in the sense that they could not, there were not enough similarities between the two to make a conclusive decision. In
I see.
short, I mean, like, in
It was
science,
not a match. Uh-huh.
in science, nothing is conclusive.
Uh-huh. Okay.
It's
fair
about
enough.
certainty, and there was no certainty.
Okay. Well, I guess the FBI did do there. Okay, so let's keep going because I know we're going to go a bit long here. So this is one of my favorite scenes where we start with Detective Park going to the shaman, and then him and Cho go to sort of like the scene of the crime to go see what's happening and do, well, not to go see what's happening, to go do the shaman, whatever the shaman told them to do. And then they hear something coming up to them, and they're like, oh, who's that? It's like, haven't you ever heard the perpetrator always returns to the scene of the crime. So they go over and then they hide, and it turns out it's Detective Soul. And Detective Cho's like, oh, he looks pretty cool though, smoking his cigarette there. I'm like, what the hell is he doing? And then a second person comes, and and then Detective Soul has to go and hide, and then that person starts masturbating, pulls out some woman's clothes and has red underwear on. And then they have to chase that person down and go through the scenes, and then they end up at the rock quarry. I really like how that scene was constructed, and how just one thing leads to another.
No, I agree. I mean, again, like, to this director's credit, like, the construction of every scene and the logical progression of everything that happens in the film are just so flawless. So going from a shaman to the ritual to everything you mentioned, all the way ending to the arrest of another innocent man, a fucking pervert for sure, but an innocent man, is fascinating. I also really like the chase scene itself.
Yeah, it's well done. It's all on foot. It looks good. Sort of takes you through the town. You sort of get your second introduction to that one teenage kid who sadly is killed, and it's nice how they sort of built that into it, so you get more of a connection with her. And then I really like how they conduct the scene at the quarry, where you get to see a little bit of like the industry of the town, and you also just see how Detective Park, through his actual detective skills, notices the red underwear and is able to find them. But he'd rather live behind the myth of his mystic being able to stare into someone's eyes and get them. And then how he calls in Detective Cho to perform the jump kick to knock him down. Detective Cho is basically like the enforcer in hockey, where he has no discernible skills as a detective other than to beat the shit out of people.
Yeah. No, for sure. And in this one, I think the torture, this then leads to the torture of that man, which, again, another moment where you correctly say, like, So is such a bad cop, in a sense that, like, after a little bit he realizes, no, that man is not the killer, and starts doing his own investigation. However, he allows the other two to just torture this guy, like hanging him. I mean, they do a whole bunch of shit. And
Yeah, he's hanging upside down. I mean,
Yeah.
at one point the chief comes and he like sees the rope. It's like, "Were you hanging this guy?" They're like, yeah."
yeah. But I mean, the guy is gross, which is kind of the weird part about it. Like, the man is gross. Like, they visit his house, and he's just like full of pornography, and he really likes the really like awful shit.
Yeah.
But so I mean, like, he would be perfect as he was the perfect suspect, but for the fact that he wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, it accomplishes a couple things. It shows also how it sort of stimulates the imagination of the locals in sometimes some pretty perverse ways.
You know, I don't know if we were going to talk about this later, but one thing about the chase scene, and also this man's household, and in general, but like the chase scene is what caught my attention, was the alleyways or locations where they were doing the chase. They all look like almost like illegal encampments, or if you will, like shanty towns. Like, I mean, they weren't shanty towns per se because it's a town, but I mean, all the structures, all the houses, all the buildings were like loosely made with like loose wood, lots of garbage. So I mean, that's, if you've ever been to a shanty town, that's how they look. So whether or not it was a shanty or a slum or you know, like illegal encampment, didn't matter. It really showed how poor the town was. I mean, even including the house of the pervert when they go into his investigate into his house.
Right.
And you got a
Tiny.
tiny ass house with a wife and many kids, and the wife is just dying of something. She's sick. She's coughing a whole bunch. And it's just sort of interesting in the sense that almost you realize, I realized in that moment, all the suspects were people who were extremely poor as well.
Yeah. I mean, this whole film, pretty much everyone is like not wealthy. It's like just varying degrees of poverty.
Right, but I mean, this man was definitely within the lowest degree of poverty.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the other person's place we see is Detective Park, and I wouldn't call Detective Park even middle class, but it's definitely a little bit nicer than this person's place.
Right. But I mean, yeah, they're all poor. But I mean, even then, with Detective Park, the first time, for example, where his wife, I think, or his girlfriend,
eventual wife for sure. I mean, we see her in the flash forward to 2003.
Right. So yeah, his girlfriend, when she's talking about the mentally disabled kid, he's like describe him, and she's like, I don't know, and then the only thing she thinks of saying is like, poor, and it's like, damn, okay. so you got like classism within that area, and I mean, and I like how it's present and never discussed. It's not on your face. It's just it's there.
Yeah, it's part of the backdrop and the scenery that adds so much to this film. Okay, let's keep it moving. The final kill. I thought this one was good. It's probably the most one that shows like a sense of dread and the most frustration with it, where the car won't stop, or won't start. I'm sorry, and he can't follow the person. And we also sort of one of other interesting thing I thought it showed here is it actually shows the killer's POV, and we get this sort of like sick choice that he has between actually Detective Park's wife and the young teenager student that we had seen earlier. And it's interesting. This is probably like the most we see of the actual killing. Most of that stuff is off screen, but we see the person like tied up and being hauled, and it just has like a certain sense of hopelessness where you know that these detectives have tried a lot, and they have, we just know there's another murder that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is the moment we had talked about before, where the cops cannot even get back up because they're all repressing student protests.
Yeah,
This,
yeah,
that's a moment too. So it's like the entire system is built to allow that girl to be brutally killed.
yeah, yeah. And then it cuts to rain, and we see the Band-Aid that's discovered by Detective Soul. And I think that's the thing that really just tips him over the edge, that where he gets to the point where he's like, we just need to beat this guy to an inch of his life and make him confess. And the Detective Park is like, you have changed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I thought that was good, and sort of shows the darker nature of this. It's probably the most devastating kill in that sense. One other thing I wanted to bring up, and just sort of like the general patterns and stuff that are established. One thing that I think is interesting is that we established that they're wearing red, and it rains, and there's a sad song that plays. And throughout the film, after those are established, we slowly discard them. One of the people that's killed, she's originally wearing a red jacket, and then she takes it off. And then eventually, that last kill, actually, that I was just talking about, does not occur in the rain. And actually, the aftermath occurs in the rain. And the sad song is probably the only thing that really lasts to the end, and that's what lets them catch Park. I don't know if the sad song actually applied to the last kill or not, but regardless,
yeah, it did. It did.
It's interesting the way that they have these patterns, and then they slowly get like reduced or eliminated.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, at the end, the sad song is probably the only thing that works, which is what leaves you believing till the end that that the prime suspect,
yeah,
is the killer.
Right. And also, coincidentally, is a thing that is discovered by none of the three detectives or the chief, but by I don't even know if she's Detective Kwan, but Kwan, the police officer.
Which is another thematic thing in this film, which is also subtle, but definitely opens conversation, which is I mean, viewing it within with feminist perspective, if you will, that you have all the characters that you see are male. And Detective Kwan, and she is a detective. At least that's how she's introduced in the film.
Okay.
I mean, the only times that she was used, or that she shows up, is as a what's it called? As a trap for the killer. She's wearing red, blah blah blah, and I mean, the first time you see her actually is when they're using her as kind of undercover to see if they can catch the killer that way, and the only thing they talk about between the two cops as they see her is how hot she looks with the lipstick and makeup. We can go later on that scene if you remember it.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, she's not treated seriously as an investigator. I mean, even when she brings up what is eventually like a very good clue,
right?
It's like.
Right. So yeah, that was the second part was when she brings up the clue is they are they're discussing different theories. Basically, they have nothing clearly, and the only reason she's there is because she's serving coffee to all of them. Even though she's a detective, she's serving coffee, and then when she brings up her theory or her observations, as you mentioned, at least Detective Park dismisses her observation, and Detective So is like looks into it.
Yeah, I mean the chief and Detective Soul do take it seriously, but Park has a more promising lead to follow up with the Baldies.
Right, and Park instead, and Park instead, is like just serving more coffee or whatever. Like,
yeah. So yeah, I have one last scene. Then I want to bring up Song Kang Ho, and then we're gonna wrap because I know we're going pretty long here. Okay, so last scene I have is the tunnel shot, which is like sort of the dramatic climax of the film, where he grabs the suspect, who I think is also named Park in the film, but he grabs him and he's ready to kill him, and then the DNA evidence comes in. And it is not conclusive or does not match. And so it has, and I love the shot where Park is holding him up. He's like, "Is it you?" And then he just is like, "Fuck, I don't know." And he just pushes him aside and he lets them escape. Meanwhile, Soul is so off the rails at that point that he fires a shot at him, which misses, and the guy just sort of walks away. And one thing I wasn't sure about is, like, after so many viewings of this film, after so many years, I wasn't sure if it was going to land well. But for me, it still hits super well. It's just still very emotional, and it works on just about every level.
Oh no, definitely, and I think part has to do with the little details, in that shot as well, because it has some dramatic elements. For example, the train. As is not only that Park lets go, a Detective Park lets go the prime suspect, but as he lets go the prime suspect, there's a train that literally breaks, that cuts their view between the prime suspect and the main characters, and I think visually, I believe this is probably the intent. Not only the train goes through it, but the train runs over the FBI's conclusions,
That's right.
completely ripping them apart. Sort of telling you that this breach between what should be done and what shouldn't have, and sort of like just separating both of them. And I think all those little elements make it even stronger as a film and more add more significance to it.
Right. It's beautifully shot too, also in the rain and like just very moody. And then we see the person like, we see like the shot from the tunnel where everyone's like a silhouette. It looks fantastic, and it's super dramatic.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right, so you wanted to jump into Song Kang-ho?
Yeah, let's quickly do Song Kang-ho. I think for me this is still his favorite part. He's one of my favorite Korean actors, or maybe I should just say that unequivocally, he's one of my favorite actors. I can't really think of any good American equivalent. I said earlier that I think he's good in Parasite, but he's great in this. For me, this is his best role, and just the way that he sort of has this sort of improvisational humor to it, but can also just sort of land the correct emotional beats. In that sense, I think he's a perfect fit for Bong Joon-ho, who does frequently cast him. So I think he's really, really fantastic in this film. And, you know, for South Korean audiences, I don't think he needs to be celebrated much more. He has won a lot of awards over there and is rightly seen as one of the great actors over there. But I think for maybe audiences that are not familiar with his work, he might go a little... They just might not be as aware of how great of an actor he is.
I completely agree. He's a very impressive actor. And I mean, everything you said, basically, everything you said. I've seen him on roles where they're just straight up dramatic, and he's a serious character. And it is impressive how he can really play those roles as well. So, I mean, with Bong Joon-ho's films, he tends to be sort of a comedic character at a certain level.
Partly, at least.
Partly comedic. But I mean, there are other films where he's not, and he does really well. So, I mean, I would say he's probably one of the best actors out there.
Yeah.
That I've seen.
And he's I think he's 2 years older than Bong, so hopefully their partnership can last. I mean, he kind of gives me the feeling after watching a Bong film with him, and I think that was one of the reasons that Bong's films in Korea are better, is because they also have Song he can utilize song more. But it sort of gives me the feeling just when you see like Taxi Driver or Raging Bull with Scorsese and De Niro, like fuck, that was a great film, and Scorsese made it, and De Niro is great in it. And for me, I got a similar feeling when watching this, where it's like, yeah, Bong fucking nailed it, but Song was also fantastic. And it really helped to nail in the points. So, like, if I was to name the second most important person in this film, it'd probably be that person.
I completely agree.
Okay, so let's wrap then. Now that we have covered that, I think this probably ran pretty long. So, who won the movie and rating?
This is no doubt for me. Unfortunately, it's Bong Joon-ho. It's just a very masterfully done film. Between the writing, the directing, the film composition, the shot compositions, everything. I mean, it's a very impressive film to watch.
Yeah. Is it your favorite film of the 21st century? Or
No.
up there?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if I have a favorite. I mean, maybe.
Okay.
I don't know. But
It's up there. Okay.
It's up there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I have to go with Bong too. This is just one of those ones where it's so clear that he's the winner that I can't even try to give it to someone else. Rating?
10.
Yeah, same here. 10 out of 10. Yeah. Yeah. I had one last note, and I can't read my handwriting, so that's it. I was going to say, this 10 out of 10, I would come closer to saying this is a perfect film than Argento's films. It's interesting to sort of go from Argento's films to this, how those are so like visually stimulating. It's almost like this just uses a different part of your brain, where it's just so perfectly constructed, and stuff just works on a different level. Whereas like Argento films, I enjoy them a lot, and I adore them, but they don't have the same emotional tenor and gravity as a film like this. So this is probably one that I more readily recommend than Dario Argento film.
Wait, did you give a 10 to one of the Argento films?
I gave it to a bunch of Argento films.
That we talked about in this podcast?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Thanks for paying attention.
I don't know. I forget. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm giving you shit.
No, that's interesting. I don't give many 10s at all. So, like,
I don't either. According to my ratings, it's like about 1 in every 70 films that I give a 10. But, for film to film, it's been a high amount, mainly because it's selection bias. I'm selecting the films.
Yeah, we talk about films that are usually about films that we like and that we want to recommend, of course. Still, I guess I'm just not a very big 10 giver.
Well, I mean, it depends. If you were selecting your favorite films of all time to bring on here, you'd probably be giving more 10s.
Oh, sure. And instead, I'm selecting films that I think are interesting to watch, but not necessarily like my favorites.
Yeah. Whereas I'm doing kind of a mix of it. So it's fine. It makes sense. Okay, well, thank you everyone for tuning in. You can send us an email at zafilmtofilm@gmail.com or send us a tweet at zafilmtofilm, and we will catch you all next time.
See ya.